Well,
I'm not in any rush.
30 to 45 minutes is sort of what they've been averaging,
Okay, Jeff, all systems are go.
Okay, so Cindy, if you want to just start off by saying your name and spelling it so we have the correct.
My name is Cindy, C-I-N-D-Y, Maker, M-A-D-E-R.
Okay, great. So we were talking a little bit before, you had mentioned that you came to town to attend Aquinas College. Could you sort of talk about what year that was and what your experience was going to that school?
It was in 1961, I guess, is when I actually came. I came as a sophomore. It was a wonderful undergrad experience. It was personal, it was safe, just as, for a person, not for a gay person or anything like that. It was just a wonderful environment, and it made me want to stay in this area.
Hmm. Okay.
Mhm.
And when did you sort of self-identify as a lesbian woman?
Oh, certainly in college.
In college,
Yes,
okay.
in college, although I didn't have a relationship until I was close to 30. I was already out teaching, and so yeah, I was not a late bloomer, but a late connector, I guess you would call it. And from then on, I was very comfortable being a lesbian, but I was not active in the community or anything like that, because first of all, who knew whether there was a community at that time, but also because I was teaching in the Catholic school system at that time. So I was certainly in a relationship, but very, very low profile.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Could you talk a little bit about maybe the difference, kind of socially or just the atmosphere, say then from like the late 60s to now comparative, like what, because as you said you kind of kept a low profile with your partner, and maybe that's because it was just the smart thing to do.
Oh, it was really a smart thing to do.
Can you just talk about, what has maybe changed and sort of evolution in your own life and what you've seen in terms of Grand Rapids as a whole?
Well, certainly, one of the things that's changed is something like this. This event could never have taken place. But more than anything, it's a feeling of visibility, legitimacy, more than anything. It's nothing to be covered up. It's not to be whispered about, although that certainly still takes place, I'm sure. But it's not my feeling anymore. I haven't felt that way in 20 years, 30 years probably. And I think for me personally, that's the biggest difference. As far as socially, again, I can't speak except from hearsay from the period of time that I just sort of sad that I missed the Aradia times with the lesbian community. But for my own experience, it began around the late 80s. And that was the founding of the network here in Grand Rapids. I had been, again, a very low profile, but I changed jobs around that time and became very, very involved with the network. The first meeting was a glorious house on Morris Avenue, Jeff and Dennis's home. And there were, I'm just going to estimate, there could have been 100 people there.
Oh.
It was, to have that, even that possibility in the air. It was shortly after the March on Washington, I believe. I was not there, but that was the catalyst for the meeting. And just the air of, wow, we could do this in Grand Rapids. And you can't say enough about the two of them as the catalyst.
How was that meeting sort of solicited? I mean, how did people find out that gathering was taking place? Was it just word of mouth, or was there a newsletter or some mechanism that people found out about it?
There certainly wasn't a newsletter, but during that time, there was, of course, the organization Dignity, and that was primarily men, not limited at all, but primarily men, and many women went to their meetings, as did I, when I first decided I've got to get involved socially. And so I probably learned about it there. It was also, I know, sure they posted flyers in Easttown and that type of thing, but no newsletter, nothing is formalized there.
Okay. What was the significance of this group forming in the late 80s to you personally, and then just do you think to the LGBT community as a whole? I mean, what opportunities did that provide people to have this organization kind of come together?
Well, you know, it's interesting because in some ways, I don't want to call it a double-edged sword, but it had pluses and minuses in the minds of many, many people. No one could deny that visibility is a good thing, although that didn't happen automatically either with the network, but that was the catalyst. But it was very, one of them were very leery. Kind of a feeling of this is going to be the men and it's all going to be about, perhaps about sex, but about flamboyance and visibility. And it wasn't that women were afraid to be visible, it was that those issues didn't interest them. Much more interested in child care and the YWCA and spousal abuse and things like that. So I think if I were to speak about it from the terms of a woman's viewpoint, a lesbian woman, not even a gay woman, and I make kind of a distinction between those two terms. But from a lesbian woman, I would say that it was not, excuse me, it wasn't an automatic draw for the women by any means. And it never did quite catch on. And everyone is certainly thankful for its presence, and it has done. But it's never been a women's organization by any means. And I think many people find it surprising that the gay male community and lesbian community aren't all one, but they're not.
That's interesting. Was there, because of that reality, was there ever been either other organizational attempts or other venues in which particularly lesbian women felt more comfortable or felt like more supported their particular interests and needs that the network did not?
Well, there had been long before the network an organization called AREDIA, and that was in the heyday of second wave feminism and lesbian openness. It was very private, but very large groups of women socializing social justice issues. But to my knowledge, there really was never a group that women took hold of after that. There's Women's Night at the network, but other than that, it was more about visibility, politics to a certain extent, community activism, but not issues that really seem to draw them.
Okay. Were you ever involved in any local campaigns or efforts? I'm thinking that these are not exclusive to, obviously, to the LGBT community, but you know, some people we've talked to have said that in the 80s, when sort of the AIDS crisis sort of hit us all in many ways, that was one area that some people got involved in for a variety of reasons. In the 90s, there was the city ordinance campaign. So were you involved in any of those, or did you know?
I was involved by virtue of being part of the network, although by that time I possibly wasn't part of the network. I'd like to explain my kind of mixed viewpoints about the network, because it's been such a central organization. I sought it out and loved it because it gave me a way to begin knowing the gay community in this town. But I rapidly began to see the side that more feminist women were taking. They weren't against it, but just kind of wanted to be separate from it. And that appealed to me. So anyway, just to get that out
Sure.
there. By virtue of, everybody, even then, many people still had membership in the network, not actively. But just by virtue of that membership, we certainly knew about the AIDS Resource Center and much of that. Also, for quite a while, for a few years there at the beginning, I was the editor of the network news. I was the first editor, was the first newsletter. And so, just by virtue of that, I was really aware of everything, and participated to the extent that a regular member would, but not a lead or anything in that. Same thing with the ordinance, certainly attended commissioner meetings and that, but I wasn't a lead figure or anything.
Okay,
Pride celebration, same thing.
sure.
And that was such a huge thing.
Yeah,
In public,
yeah. And
they
when
advertised it.
did the Pride celebration start in Grand Rapids?
Oh, I would imagine it was within the first year of the network.
So late '80s
Mhm.
again.
Yes.
And could you recall like what took place maybe at the first one that you attended or first ones that you attended?
Well,
Like,
you know,
what-
it wasn't downtown the way it has been so often. It was at a park, Johnson Park, Townsend Park, I don't even know what park. It was public. It was advertised, but it was sparsely attended. Nice of them, but.
Mhm.
But then Jeff Swanson said, "We're downtown." It was just a breath of fresh air,
Mhm.
everything they did.
I mean, obviously, we're in West Michigan, and you know, there's some pretty entrenched sort of moral and philosophical values that are you know very conservative and obviously in lots of ways, but particularly around issues around one's sexual orientation. That's one that is certainly people have been quiet in responding to it. I mean, we have institutions and we have families in this community who have been very vocally opposed to that, and have even funded campaigns to try to undermine the efforts to try to have more equality around that. You know, what's your sort of experience with that, or just your own thoughts about just that? That's just a part of living in West Michigan.
That pretty much is how I feel. It's a part of living in West Michigan, but on the other hand, I think West Michigan gets a bad rap. I think there's a basic decency about West Michigan. It also means people of profile,
Mhm.
don't flaunt anything. But there is a basic decency. And so I've never been particularly bothered by those conservative voices, some more than conservative, some hateful voices.
Mhm.
I've never been particularly bothered by them. They're just part and parcel of how things go. That's just how it goes.
Okay.
And as maybe at some point, we'll get into my teaching and how I've just noticed it change so much through the years, teaching my students on that issue. So anyway.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's a good transition. I mean, you taught high school and Catholic schools for years.
Oh, it wasn't ever mentioned then.
Yeah.
Oh, heavens, no. Absolutely not. It's not that it was scorned. It wasn't that it was vilified. It wasn't there. It was never mentioned.
Then you eventually went to Grand Valley in '89.
89.
So what made you decide to teach there? What opportunities opened up for you to move to the college level?
Well, I had already, there was a 2-year period where I taught, or I was in the counseling department at junior college at that time. So I was already out of K-12. The position that was in teacher education seemed to fit me, I seemed to fit it. And it was possibly one of the best moves I've made in my life. And don't get me wrong, I loved teaching high school. It was wonderful. I don't know if I could do it again, but it was wonderful. But it probably one of the best moves I made ever. It was sane, it was civilized, it was rational. It was wonderful.
Yeah. And so talk about, you know, education work at Grand Valley. What have you taught?
I've always been in the teacher ed department, teacher education. I have almost always taught, when I've been teaching, I've done administrative work also, accreditation and that kind of thing. But my teaching has almost always been graduate level, and it's been teachers coming back for certification, teachers coming back for master's degrees. I don't remember a whole lot at the beginning as I was there, although there were so many women and men in the gay community that were at Grand Valley that I had known socially, that it was, there was a very large circle of Grand Valley faculty and staff. So there was a lot of communication. This doesn't have to do with teaching, but I can remember one day I got a call from the president's office. I mean, even then I was a low profile. I'm not a flaunted person, but a call from the president's office asking if I would co-chair an advisory committee for the president on gay and lesbian issues. And I thought, how does he know? How do they know? Well, that answer now is kind of self-evident. But at any rate, to my memory, that was the first formal move that was taken at Grand Valley. From that, and it was a rather large committee, very representative of the whole college, and I believe a sincere effort for the president's office to get a handle on what's going on in this community, because it was not a silent issue by that time. So wide representation, and a formal report was issued from the committee, a 20-page report with many, many recommendations. After a year or two, I believe the committee was